a few moments. Till then, I'll tell you what's happening. And if by any chance you missed your inbox or mail, you please do come and join this event. They are all outstanding event which we curated exclusively for you. On 24th June, we have, that is tomorrow, uh, we have a session on read and grow, because we again strongly believe you to be a good leader, you to be a great reader. And we have been able to really convince, and this program has become real hit. It's almost 1 year since the time we launched this program. And tomorrow we are going to discussion on the theme of the book, Stay with Why, how great leaders inspire everyone to take action. And we have got some outstanding panelists, Babu Krishnamurthy and Rajesh Balaji, Ramachandran, who is a partner, also Vijay Prabhat Kamalakaran, and is also founder CEO of one of the strong Storytel India Camp. So do join us on tomorrow. Then on the 25th, we have a business conclave on reimagining business in New India. This is a paid program. It's already full sold out. And I request you, we already more 270 nominations. Because we are not able to accommodate everybody, we are taking this program live for all the members. As a member, you have not got any, not able to join us, not to worry. It's live on webinar, live on YouTube. And we have some outstanding speakers talking to us. And with the inaugural session, the Chief Commissioner of Income Tax is going to inaugurate that. Thereafter, we lined up some outstanding things, some of the subjects which are rarely discussed, alternative investment and technology, success and family businesses. And it's going to be a very, very outstanding event for a day. Please do join us online. On the 25th of June, you will get a reminder starting from 9:30 till 5 o'clock in the evening. Then on the 27th, again, we have an event, not to be missed event, again, the Comrades and the Mullah, China, Afghanistan, and the new Asian geopolitics. Again, we have some outstanding panelists, Stanley Johnny, he is international affairs editor of The Hindu, Anand Krishnan, Beijing correspondent, The Hindu from China, he will be joining us from China. Then we have Srinath Raghavan, Indian history, contemporary history, and Azim Amin, he is a former principal secretary to Ashraf Ghani and former president of Afghanistan. Who else can come and speak to us what exactly happened behind the scene? I think we are indeed privileged and blessed to have. He is willing to come and speak to us. Azim Amin is be joining us from London, and Vinita Ravi is an independent scholar who will be joining us. So we got an outstanding panel again. It's happening on 27th of June, and this again webcast live. Please do join us. And besides that, there are a number of other events are happening in the month of July. And I'm not going to take too much of time. Another minute I'll take. Some event which we do not want you to miss it is on, we have a KCG Varghese endowment lecture. It's happening on 4th of July. It's happening in the evening. We have Rajaraman, who is the head of space from Sierikota, is going to come and talk to us. Then on the 6th, we have again event, what India should be doing for higher education and what is the way forward and how we can make world-class higher education system. We have an outstanding speaker. KV Ramani is the Vice Chancellor of Sai University. He is going to be coming and talking to us. That's happening on the 6th. I'll stop with the 8th. 8th is a very, very important event. That is MMA Annual General Body Meeting of MMA. And that's the day we showcase to you what exactly we did over the year and share our happiness. And now we could do so many areas, and we've done over 600 programs and fairly done financially, and all this could happen because of your support, and because of you we could do all this, and we want to really celebrate that event with you. And we have our chief guest CK Ranganathan will be there. We got some outstanding speakers. The resident of CAS is coming from Germany, joining us. Then we have award will be given this time. Again, we started the award back, MMA award for managerial excellence. 3 categories will be awarded, that is manufacturing, services, and MSME sector. Education we couldn't get because of the various data we are not able to get it. So I'm stopping with 8th. Otherwise, we have lined up even till September. So all July also we got some outstanding event lined up. Please do come and block your diary. You're not able to come, not to worry. That's why we are bringing all this program live for you to watch from your own comfort. And if you miss it, not to worry again. It's all available for you to watch in YouTube, our YouTube channel, and also our webinar. I also want to tell you that our YouTube channel is being totally revamped. We got over 600 videos listed on our YouTube. We are listing out category wise. We are putting thumbnail. We are making it very, very easy to use it. And ultimately, our aim and the desire of the managing committee is to make it like a YouTube channel, like some of the best of the channels available in India. So like maybe Netflix, how you are able to get into what subject you wanted, and at the click of the button, you should be able to watch. I think we are the work in progress, and short, we'll be launching our YouTube channel, revamped YouTube channel. So we are trying to do so many things. Our app will be launched very soon. We are working on it during AGM. Our library is very good. We got over 1.2 million reference book and about 3,000 ebooks. So many more. So now is my time to warmly welcome all the people who joined online, and the distinguished panelists for this evening. And the subject today is, where from here is the $5 trillion economy? When we always keep discussing with Mr. Sathiya. So we talk to him almost on everyday basis. When he said, this is a topic which you should discuss, I said, sir, this topic to discuss. Do you think India can achieve $5 trillion economy? He said, if you talk like that, I think let's listen from the experts. I think I'm also eagerly waiting to listen from experts. How are you going to achieve this $5 trillion economy? Ladies and gentlemen, put your hand together to welcome the very, very special panelists what we have this evening. Mr. M.R. Sivaraman, former Revenue Secretary of Government of India. Then Mr. Arun Kumar, Malcolm Adiseshiah Chair Professor and Institute of Social Science, New Delhi. He's not new to MMA. He's spoken a couple of occasions. I walk miles to listen to him. And Mr. Kumar. Kumar is a board member of Deloitte. Deloitte, another one of the consulting. He'll be giving in the industry perspective. And Mr. Sathiya is the convener of Policy Matters, Chennai. He'll also be joining the discussion, moderating the session. As usual, if you have any questions, all the viewers watching online, please send it to the SMS number, what is available there. All the questions, the speakers are really agreed to respond to your question. Make your question relevant to the theme, what you're going to discuss. Now, may I request a distinguished panelist, and please take your place on the dais, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause to the distinguished panelists who have joined us in person and people who have joined online, Mr. Arun. You are aware of the format of this evening is that each of the speakers will speak for about 15-20 minutes, their insights. Thereafter, there'll be a discussion, and the Q&A will be there, and I will be coming and moderating the Q&A. We already got a couple of questions in our email. We'll be placing those questions too before them. Let me briefly introduce some of the distinguished speakers. Their detailed profile is already shown on the screen. Mr. M.R. Sivaraman, Sivaraman IAS retired, served as a Union Secretary of Union Revenue Secretary of India. He also postgraduate degree in economics and University of Madras and IAS cadre of Madhya Pradesh. And he had worked Director General of Civil Aviation and ex-official Additional Secretary of Government of India, Ministry of Civil Aviation. He has also worked as Executive Director, International Monetary Fund, because he brings in a lot of international exposure, being in IMF, and is also as an expert advisor of UN Security Council Committee, counter-terrorism. Currently is engaged in delivering lectures, thought leader, and very warm welcome to you, sir. Once again, we are eagerly looking forward to hearing your thought-provoking views. Then we also have with us Mr. Arun Kumar. Arun Kumar is Malcolm Adiseshiah Chair Professor, Institute of Social Science, New Delhi. He is from JNU, 1984, retired as a Chakravarti Chair Professor, and is also PhD degree from JNU and a Master in Physics from Princeton University, USA, and Delhi University. He is a gold medalist of Delhi Higher Secondary School Board, Delhi University. He is also specialized in development economics. His book number of books, and some of the books we are indeed privileged to have discussed in MMA. The book published by him on Black economy, higher education, Indian economy since independence, demonetization are some of them, which is very popular. It's written extensively on globalization and other issues, and I think it's very, very interesting insights. We're going to bring it on the topic which we are going to be discussing, and it's very candid and thought-provoking, and it comes straightforward what's happening in mind. You're going to tell Mr. Arun Kumar. Thank you so much for joining us online from New Delhi. We are eagerly looking forward to hearing you, sir. Let me also formally welcome Mr. Kumar, senior partner, and is also a partner and board member of Deloitte India, and he is also a Deloitte Global Manufacturing Nerve Center. And Kumar has also worked in areas such as supply chain transformation, market entry, corporate and competitive strategy. He has served client organizations and diverse manufacturing sectors, automotive, chemical, industrial goods, and consumer. And Deloitte has been a great supporter of MMA, and we are working together for the last 15 years. Every area being, they are our knowledge partners, they are our auditors, and many events we have joined it with Deloitte. Is indeed privilege. Warm welcome to Mr. Kumar. It's a privilege to have you with us again this evening. And Satyamurthy, it doesn't need any introduction. He's a part of MMA, but you all know him so well, and he's a thought leader. And every morning you can get some excellent mail from him on different subjects. Actually, when you read them, you really get rejuvenated. You get charged. I mean, you will really get what's happening in the state of Tamil Nadu or in Sri Lanka or in Maldives or get. So what he is convener of policy matters. He opened a think tank, self-financing think tank, and Satyamurthy is a policy analyst, commentator of Indian domestic and neighborhood policies, politics, keen interest in Sri Lanka, Maldives, and Chad. He is authority on Sri Lanka and author of books of Indian domestic politics, foreign policy in Sri Lanka. Satyamurthy was, until recently, was head of Chennai initiatives of Observation Reserve Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, this is our profile of outstanding panelists, what we are going to have. We are going to have a great evening this evening, and tighten your seat belt. We are all eagerly looking forward to listening as much as you're all eagerly looking forward. Now, I will request Satyamurthy to take it forward. Over to you, Mr. Satyamurthy.
Thank you, the MMA, for one more of this year. Wonderful evenings. Today's topic, as you know, where from here, $1 trillion economy. The question is not when we will have it. We're supposed to have it in 2025, thanks to COVID. The deadline may have shifted from, some people say 2 years, others say 5 years, but it is going to happen. And this is one of those events in Indian economy in recent years and decades where we are discussing our growth without reference to China. Whether it is strategy, military, politics, we have always tended to rather look at China rather than look up to or look down upon. So this may be one event that may not rely on China entirely. Maybe the China factor works in our favor. It may happen earlier. Maybe we will surpass a 5 trillion goal earlier. But there are other issues. This is also what our panelists, I think, will be discussing, though we don't brief them. Basically, what does it mean for Indians? $5 trillion economy like the GDP growth, etc. That is very fanciful from looking from the top. But what does it mean for the average Indian? Because given the vast population we have, demand that we have on the government and the economy, and the social economic realities. As a student of the Sri Lanka, I can say, whatever fault lines are there or faults they committed, one thing is becoming clear. The social rupture there, the socio-economic rupture there is unbelievable. That is what is going to dictate what will happen in the next few months and years. Will Sri Lanka, as we discussed the other day, last time here, end up becoming, is it heading for a third rebellion or insurgency, which I would say is still a 50% chance. It may not happen like that in India for a variety of inherent reasons, but that doesn't mean that the factors are not there. Maybe the weapons or tools or motivation may not be there. But if the reality that or not, that is what we are going to look at, apart from the facts of $1 trillion economy. To this end, we have carefully chosen 3 panelists. Mr. Sivaraman with a long experience and expertise in policy making, and as executive director of IMF, he also understands the global economic perspectives. Then we have Professor Arun Kumar, who is an academic, to give a dispassionate view of things. And of course, Mr. Kumar, who is going to give us an industry viewpoint. With that brief introduction, I invite Mr. Sivaraman to start. The speakers will have about 15 to 20 minutes to speak. After that, we will hopefully have a very fruitful and delightful Q&A. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. At the outset, I would like to thank MMA, Mr. Sathiya and Group Captain Vijay Kumar for giving me this opportunity to share some views with you. All of us read in the newspapers about GDP. But what is behind GDP? What is GDP? Some of us may know, most of us may not. The gross domestic product is the value addition made within the geographical limits of a country. I'll come to some other complications in this. Gross national product includes the value addition made by Indians outside the country. Now this GDP animal, it takes different forms. GDP also is estimated at factor prices. Factor prices means the goods and services minus the taxes which are attached to it. So normally we talk about GDP at market prices so that everyone understands. Then there is GDP with reference to a particular year. In the case of India, it is 2011-12, if I remember right. So that is a base year from which they calculate what is the GDP. So they had to go back and index the prices to come to that particular level. Now, GDP all over the world follows a system of accounts. This system of accounts has been developed by almost all the chief statisticians of most of the countries. India was also a member of this committee, UN committee. And this manual is about 600 pages. And it goes into the details of how each account has to be properly taken into consideration while estimating the GDP. There are a lot of problems in that. I'm not an academic, probably Mr. Arun Kumar say. For example, let us take paddy. What is the price of paddy you will take? Paddy at MSP, paddy at the mandi, paddy at the factory gate, paddy at the market price where you go and paddy. So there are some procedures laid down for this, but some may follow, some may not follow these procedures. Sometimes there is confusion also in taking into this account. Similarly, let us take the interest. Interest is a factor income. Structure of interest rates are innumerable, number of interests are there. What interest rate to take? For example, the street vendor who is going to the money lender close by, he takes 1,000 rupees in the morning and he agrees to pay 1,100 rupees in the evening. I have personally checked this. What is the rate of interest? The rate of interest of the government of India or the Reserve Bank of India will be much lower. So there are a lot of complications in this. The price issue, the various other things which have to be added. Then let me come to the GDP at purchasing power parity. So when you compare the GDP of nations, if you compare the nominal GDP, that is the GDP at your rupee account, divided by the dollar value, then it gives different picture. Now GDP of India at the beginning of this year would have been something. The GDP of India now will be much less in nominal terms, in dollar terms, because the dollar is increased in value vis-a-vis the rupee. So what is the exchange rate you take? So what is the price of now, as I say, the Big Mac index? Big Mac index you will see in the Economist magazine. How much does a Big Mac cost in Bombay, in Delhi, in Chennai? They are all the same. In the United States also it is supposed. So what is the difference in the Big Mac price between these two countries? So if you look at India's GDP in terms of purchasing power parity, as seen in the IMF, one of the reports I saw, in 2021, it was 8.9 trillion. So we are talking about 5 trillion 5 years hence in nominal terms. In the case of China, it was $24.14 trillion. USA, $20.9 trillion. So India, China was number one, USA number two. So in terms of purchasing power parity, we are number 3 in the world. So when you look at GDP, it's a very complex thing. What is it you are really looking at? That animal is a will o' the wisp. You catch it, it is there. You don't catch it, it is not there. Then we come to the question, is the GDP of India being correctly estimated? No, I had a running battle with economists in this issue. I'm not an economist. I don't claim to be an economist. So when this question came up on the International Monetary Fund, we were almost going out of the fund, out of the bank. We were founding members of the institutions. But our GDP at that time was very low. So I did an exercise in my office with my economists, and I found it was underestimated. So I went on shouting at Government of India. Nobody listened to me because I had to tell you the story. Monte Ahluwalia was the chief economic advisor and economic affairs secretary. He wouldn't listen to me. But I was kept on crying that we'll be out of the fund because if they are going to distribute votes, then if we do not come in that particular limit, we are going to be out. Maybe out of consideration, they may keep there, but there was a real danger. And I was also fighting for GD to be taken in purchasing power parity. So I called the chief statistician of the World Bank to my office one day. And I asked him, please tell me frankly, is the GDP of India being estimated correctly? He said, no, sir, within the four walls of this room. It is underestimated. I said, why? Because if we were to estimate India's GDP correctly, you would have been out of the window. Window means out of the IDA window. International Development Association window of the World Bank, which gives assistance to at the rate of 0.5% interest per annum and 50 years repayment with 10-year moratorium, which is almost free. You would have been out of the window. So we have not been taking many things into account. So I spoke to Jaswant Singh on this, that we have to correct it. Even then, Montague wouldn't agree. So I met Vajpayee, who was the prime minister. I told him. So he ordered the constitutional committee consisting of Vijay Kelkar, who succeeded me. He was finance secretary. And Mr. Professor Dandekar, if I remember right. He was a person who said Sivaraman doesn't know the spelling of economics. Let alone he knows the difference between economics and ecology. So he was a member. Then the Secretary Statistics. Then Dr. Rakesh Mohan, who was chairman of the National Incomes Committee. And we were there, and I came from Washington. So they asked me, I said, look, valuation of certain things in our GDP is extremely low. For example, in the case of a doctor, I was able to get some information which is not normally available to any one of us. A doctor is valued at 1,000 rupees a year. Government doctor is getting 8,000 rupees a month salary. This is nonsense. An egg has been valued at 1 naya paisa. So then Asthana said that, yes, that is correct. Mr. Dandekar will not accept it. So Mr. Asthana said, Mr. Dandekar, you are professor of economics. I have been professor of statistics. I came into the IAS after being a professor of statistics, so I know what I'm talking about. He wouldn't agree. Then Rakesh Mohan said he will do an exercise. In the next meeting after 2 months, Rakesh Mohan conceded that underestimation is to the extent of 25 to 40%. But he agreed to revise the GDP of India upwards by 18% because he said, I have concrete data. So I'm going to a revision of 18%. You can see it in the budget of that particular year. You will see it has been revised upwards by 18%. Now, why is there a problem in accepting this fact? If GDP of India is underestimated, a lot of things will go wrong. Fiscal deficit ratio will go wrong. The tax GDP ratio will go wrong. It has got a lot of implications for economic policy. Therefore, people do not want to go into it. Now, what is the other important issue concerning GDP? The black money. Now, in 2008, Pranab Mukherjee asked the National Council of Applied Economic Research, the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, and I think Indian Institute of Financial Management to do an exercise, detailed exercise on the black money. NCAER, NIPFP, all of them submitted their reports. They're not being made public. But here and there, some things have leaked. If you delve deeper and deeper into the Google and search for it, you will find some leaking of information. NCAER is reported to have given that India's black money at that time estimated at 76% of the GDP. And National Institute of Public Finance and Policy estimated it at about 72%. Unfortunately, I did not bring a paper, DNA, in which Professor Arun Kumar was going to clarify to us. He made a statement, I think in 2019, that on his estimation, the black money was 144 lakh crores. I would request him to clarify. Now, the point is, how much of this black money is in the GDP? Some of it may be there, some of it may not be there. So it's very difficult to say how much is there in the GDP. Now I'll give you an example. The street vendor, most of us will not be looking at them, but I studied it. Next door to my house, the person who sells breakfast, lunch, tea, and this thing. I studied her very carefully because I was angry with her for many reasons. Because she was chopping chicken and mutton right in front of the State Bank. Her income, net income was 7,500 to 10,000 rupees a day. That computer. Why I am saying this? Proven by the fact she purchased a 50 lakh worth of flat next to my building. She has purchased. So if you look at the coconut vendor in Chowpatty Beach, which also I studied when I was in the IMF, because I wanted to estimate. His net income at that time was 1,000 rupees a day. And he said on Sundays and Saturdays, you will get 2,000 rupees a day. So many of these things, whether we are estimating it, economists will say we do extrapolation, we do interpolation, all these things. How much of it is captured, we do not know. I would again request Professor Arun Kumar to say how much of this black money forms part of the GDP. Now, even if you take 30% of it is, where are we today? According to the budget norms, 2022-23 estimate is 258 lakh crores is the estimate of GDP. Now you add 30% or 40% of black money to it, divided by rupees 70 per dollar, which we assume as the equilibrium rate of exchange of where are we are already $4.5 trillion or $5 trillion. So there are a lot of problems in regard to the GDP. Now, be that as it may, let us assume that GDP is what it is, $3.5 trillion. So we had to make good $1.5 trillion to reach that figure of $5 trillion. Are we in a position? Now, value addition in a country is dependent on investment. Investment dependent upon savings. What has been our savings rate in the last few years? It has been very, very unsatisfactory. 2017, our savings rate was 31.34. 2018, 32. 2019, 31, 20, 30. And 21, it has come down to 28%. Compare it with China's 45.5%. Then this has got an important relationship because savings divided by the capital output ratio gives the rate of growth of an economy. That's a standard formula. In the case of India, it should be around 4.5, which means we are growing at about 7%, which is what we see. Now, if we have to touch $5 trillion with this rate of savings, then we may take 7 years. If we grow at 8%, then we may take 5 years, given $3.5 trillion. But there are several state governments which are now making a heroic attempt. UP government, for example, Yogi Adityanath has invited global tenders for advising the UP government to take it to a $1 trillion economy in 5 years. It is impossible because UP has got $256 billion as GDP today. It cannot go to $1 trillion in 5 years. It is not possible. So first time when he floated tender, nobody came. Second time he has again floated tender. So savings is very important and our savings rate is very low. So far this government has not put forth any schemes to increase the savings of the people. We are dependent on also foreign savings, foreign direct investment coming. Secondly, our defense expenditure is increasing. Although we can't call defense expenditures non-productive because in the sense defense itself, it gets value addition is there. And apart from that, now because of indigenization, a lot of employment will be generated and value addition within the country will take place. Then the third factor which is eating away into our resources is the periodical elections which take place. One general election costs 4,000 crores. One state election may be costing 200 to 300 crores depending upon the size of the state and the complexity. So you can see the amount of money that is being spent. Of course, there also there will be value addition. I'm not saying there will not be value addition. A lot of people got employed, But it is again a drain, which could have been used for many other purposes. Then we have one of the very important things which people forget and which has never been brought to light. The serious regional disparities in incomes. If I give you certain figures, it will be startling. In the case of Bihar, the per capita income in 2019-20, because I have taken a standard, 50,733. Goa had a per capita income of 5.2 lakhs. Delhi had a per capita income of 5.6 lakhs. 14 states in India have a per capita income of more than $3,000. 10 states in India around 2.5 to Tamil Nadu falls in that. So you look at the disparity in income. Bihar has a population of 10 crores. If 10 crore people in India have got 1/10 of the per capita income of one of the wealthiest states in the country, and if this country wants to run, 10 crore people are pulling you backward. So what is happening in Bihar? They are willing to spend a lot of money on caste census, but they don't want to spend money on mapping the MSME sector there to find out how they can grow. That's not happening. So these are some policy constraints which are there in many state governments, but some state governments like Tamil Nadu, Uttar Pradesh, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Telangana, they are trying to move forward. Tamil Nadu has said that by 2030, our GDP will be $1 trillion. UP wants to make it earlier, but UP is progressing fast. Now, if you take all these things into account, we may probably, if international situation permits us, we may probably hit the target which even earlier. But there are other things which have to be taken into account. Internal disturbances, natural disasters. If you look at the natural disasters, probably very few people know that the International Meteorological Organization has estimated the loss of India in 2020 on account of natural disasters, $26.3 billion. So much of wealth have got eroded because they have to be rebuilt. If you're rebuilding this, yes, there will be in an accountant's term, there will be value addition, but you're rebuilding an asset which has been lost. So this is the order of disaster which we had, and these figures are not published by the government. These are compiled by international organizations. So this is a figure which I got from the International Meteorological Organization that India lost 26.3 billion. So I have talked about the discrepancy, I've talked about the savings rate, I've talked about the natural disasters. Then there are problems in the international financial system. Again, they are talking about a recession hitting the United States. We have the interest rates going up in the United States. We have this war which has created unusual inflationary levels the world over, which is also percolating into India, which we are not able to tackle. So these are some of the very important factors which may obstruct our movement towards a multi-trillion-dollar economy, or rather $5 trillion economy. In addition to that, one very worrying feature of the Indian economy is the falling labor participation rate. Our labor participation rate came down to 40. And now they are periodically assessing the labor participation rate. On December 21, they assessed that it has now reached 45.7, which is very low. Bangladesh is having 55% labor participation rate. We are having only 45.7. Why? Because our labor participation rate amongst women is one of the probably the lowest in the world at 19. If our labor participation rate amongst women goes up, then our labor participation rate for India as a whole will go up. People do not come and produce things if they remain idle at home. Then how can there be value addition? In the case of Tamil Nadu, I saw a report that the youth do not want to go for a job. The lowest labor participation of youth is in Tamil Nadu. These, of course, Sripati may know very well, but that is happening. And there are certain remedial action being taken by the government. For example, they are now launching a massive program of self-help groups among women. There are about 53 million or 5.3 million self-help groups. There are a lot of women get employed, self-employed. I am myself in charge of about 200, my organization in charge of about 200 self-help groups. Some of them, mind you, have a turnover of 50,000 rupees a week. Some of them have a turnover of 10,000 rupees a week. When they make pickles, etc., they have got 5,000 rupees a week. When they make bakery product, they get 10,000 rupees a week, 50,000 rupees a week. Do they get added to the value addition in the country by GDP estimate? I don't know. Them economists will say we are doing extrapolation, so it may get added. I'm not very sure about it. So this labor participation rate is a very important factor in regard to improving productivity and production in the country. Productivity increase is also extremely important. So when Manmohan Singh became Prime Minister, naturally I went and called on him because I had known him from 1977. So then he asked me, Sivaraman, may I ask you a question? I am Prime Minister now. What would you do if you were the Prime Minister? First thing to do. I said, the first thing I will do is to raise the minimum wages in this country. He said, why? He said, if you raise the minimum wages, at least the government agencies will pay and a lot of other people will pay. But he said, the industry will clobber me on my head. That is his usual expression. Why? Because they say we will lose competitiveness. I said, why should they lose competitiveness if they increase productivity? If you increase the minimum wage, you can also expect greater productivity. Now, on the contrary, what is happening in this country is a large number of states are going in for freebies. Now, freebies are making people a little bit indolent. Although we may say freebies is a matter of correcting the social injustice that has taken place within the system. But to a certain extent is all right. To a section of the people, it's okay. Even in the United States, Obama gave free cell phones to a lot of people who are very poor. But to what extent you should give freebies and where you should draw the line. In the United Kingdom, if anyone of you studied British history, toward the end of the 18th century, there was what is known as Convenor agreement, where the lords and dukes and others joined hands and they said all the poor should be given free things. So they started giving free bread, free food, free clothing and everything. And then later on it was taken over by the parish. I'll take 3-4 more minutes. If you cut me short in between, then everything will collapse. So you can extend it for some time. So then ultimately, they did not get labor for the industries. So William Pitt the Younger, I think, he abolished the poor laws and he said people were to be paid according to the work. So when you look at, then the final point I want to make, because he's hurrying me, India's forex reserves, which stood at $641 billion, are now come below $600 billion. People are talking a lot of things about this $1 billion. You got a lot of reserves. No, they are not reserves that belong to us. It's not trade surplus reserves. There is some amount of reserve which can be called free, which are come through FDI, which are come through remittances, which cannot go back. But the rest of the thing may be called hot money. They can fly away. Foreign institutional investors, even FDI people can sell off assets and go back. So it can rapidly go away. I watched this thing happening in the case of South Korea on the screen. We had those days, we had this meeting also. And at that time, South Korea used to lose $1 billion per hour. And they lost $65 billion in 3 days. They were collapsing. And IMF had to go and rescue them, talking to the bankers and all, please do not withdraw the money. So we cannot think that this $500, $600 billion is a great asset that we have. We don't have that asset. So I want to say that in the coming years, there is also going to be destructive technologies coming in and replacing many of the things that we see today. We have to compulsorily shut down thermal power plants in the next 2-3 years because of the climatic change. So what happens to the people who are working in the mines? 2.5 million families are dependent on mines alone. And there has been a study on this also. They get thrown out. They suffer. There will be social problems because of this. Then automobile sector, just like the cell phones replace the normal telephone lines, the EVs are going to replace all the existing vehicles very fast in this country. When once you have the infrastructure ready, they will all switch over to this. What happens to for example, 63,000 petrol pumps are there. Each one may be having 10 to 15, some may be having 25, 30. What happened to 1.5 million workers there? What happened to the people who are employed in the auto components? I mean, there are a lot of people here, members here, auto component manufacturer. An EV has got 20 moving parts, I am told. Whereas an ICE engine has got 2,000 moving parts. So what happens to them? Where will they go? Is there a plan by the government of India? Probably not. So these are going to be some of the major obstacles that we will come across in our march towards making this country a $5 trillion or $10 trillion economy. Rajan that day Raghuram Rajan gave a statement, India could easily become a $10 trillion economy by 2030, he said, provided they take some steps. But these are some of the obstacles. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for kick-starting this discussion. Now I call upon Professor Arun Kumar to take the podium from Delhi for an academic expert's view of the subject. Over to you, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
I have a PPT which I'm sharing. I hope you're able to see that. So the question that I'm raising is, when will Indian economy reach $5 trillion? Because eventually it will. But what are the pitfalls? What are the problems? And especially after Mr. Sivaraman has spoken, I think it makes my task easier because he's covered a large part of the ground. Now, as a preliminary, Prime Minister Modi, after coming back to power in 2019, had set a target of reaching $5 trillion by 2024-25, that is in 5 years. Now, I have spoken on this earlier, and I've given arguments about, the Indian economy in these books of mine and many recent articles on the subject of GDP. Mr. Sivaraman has already pointed out what are the difficulties in measuring GDP, including how the underestimation takes place, and especially because of the black economy, there's a massive underestimation that takes place of the black economy. But we need to, at the current moment, bring in the issue of the pandemic, which we have just about come out or maybe coming out of it. Maybe there's a fourth wave, but the fourth wave may be mild. But nonetheless, pandemic has affected the economy quite seriously. And what's happening is that the Ukraine war has come in at this point of time, which is actually creating a huge problem globally. So both the pandemic and the Ukraine war have had continuing problems for the world economy, including the Indian economy in the last more than 2 years now. And what I've been arguing in my book is that, we are headed towards a new normal. And what is this new normal? How would it impact our growth? That is something that we need to think about from now so that we can take care of some of the problems that are emerging. One of the key things, of course, is that there's a huge uncertainty. We don't know how long the Ukraine war will last, whether the pandemic waves will ebb now and will not disturb the economy much, even though China's economy has been hurt very badly by the extreme lockdown that they've gone in for, because they have a zero case load policy. And China is the manufacturing hub of the world. So supply chains have been disturbed as a result of what's going on in China. And then, of course, what can therefore be the growth? That is very difficult to predict. And if we need to revive growth, then what needs to be done and by how much can the growth be revived? Those are some of the questions that we need to consider. Now, as an introduction, as I said, the situation is very uncertain, and therefore making predictions is going to be very difficult for the coming years. What would be our rate of growth is very hard to predict at this point of time. And of course, as I said, the uncertainty is there due to the pandemic, and the Ukraine war is a proxy war between two superpowers. On the one hand, you have Russia, which is a superpower. On the other hand, you have in Ukraine the support coming from NATO and USA, which are again, big powers. So what is happening is that there are sanctions as a result on Russia, and we are headed towards a new Cold War between these two blocks. On the one hand, you'll have Russia and China and some of their supporters. On the other hand, you'll have, the US and NATO, European Union countries and other such countries together. Now, this Cold War will not be like the Cold War that we had earlier, which was ideological between a communist socialist bloc on the one hand and a capitalist bloc on the other hand. This time, both are capitalist blocs. Russian economy and the Chinese economy are also capitalist. So the struggle is for dominance. You can see that China has been facing issues with the US. There's been tariff war between them. There are other ways in which there's a struggle that's going on. And US has already said that to them, China is the bigger danger than Russia. So it's likely that the Western powers will continue to move against China. And therefore, China and Russia are going to band together. And that is going to create a big problem. So today, the policy paradigm that we follow is what is called the supply side policy paradigm. And what I'll argue is that this needs to change if we are to grow fast. Supply side policy paradigm is actually resulting in issues in the Indian economy. Now, let's look at the background to where we are. This is the data for growth in the economy from 2016-17 to 2021-22. You can see that from here, at this point, the rate of growth was about 8%, and there it has declined pre-pandemic to about 3.1% quarterly growth rate. So the economy for 8 quarters was already sliding. The rate of growth was declining. And then, of course, officially there was a precipitous decline, then a rise. And then again, because of the low base here, there was a sharp rise in the Q1 of last year. And then, of course, the rate of growth has again been coming down. It slid down to roughly about 4% or thereabouts. So, what is the growth that we can have in the economy? We need to have a historical perspective, as well as, this kind of problem that we faced due to the pandemic. And now going forward, what is the expected rate of growth? We need to look at that, because that's what will determine how quickly or how slowly we will reach a $5 trillion target. Now, this is some of the projections I have tried to do from 2018-19 up to the year 2021-22. I've taken the actual figures that are given in the estimates given by the MOSPI, the government of India, and then I've projected further. So suppose the economy grows at 10%, what will happen? If it grows at 12%, what will happen? If it grows at 14%, what will happen? If it grows at 16%, what will happen? And you can see that if we grow at 10%, then in 2017, 27-28, we will about reach a $5 trillion economy, assuming that the dollar to the rupee parity is at 80 rupees to the dollar. But if we grow at 12%, then we reach it in 2026-27. If we are growing at 14%, then we'll reach at 2025-26 late, 2025-26, and if it's at 16%, then we reach it early 2025-26. So these are some of the projections which tell you how what rate of growth will help us achieve the $5 trillion. And I'm assuming, I'm not going to the issue that Mr. Sivaraman very correctly raised, that the GDP estimation has a lot of problems. I'm assuming that we simply take the government's figures, whatever they are, and we then project on the basis of those government figures. Now, so the data-related issues are that, as I said, I've taken these figures from Government of India, MOSPI thing, and if the growth rate in 2019-20 is taken as a benchmark, then in the final year, you would have to grow at 16% to get a 10% real growth rate in the economy. This is the figures that I'm talking about for the 16% growth rate, that we'll have to be growing at about 10% in the final year, starting with 4% in the initial year. So the question is, can this be achieved by 25-26 if the economy grows at a nominal rate of 16% and the rupee only devalues at to rupees 80? But if the devaluation is more, say, to 85 rupees, then we'll be further set back. Now, in these calculations, I'm assuming that if the inflation is assumed to be at 6% for the entire period, which is very uncertain because the rate of inflation is already higher, then we require a real rate of growth of 10%. Now, that's going to be very tough, because starting at 4%, to get to 10%, we require a 16% real growth of the economy, which has never been achieved. So in other words, by 25-26, it's almost impossible to reach this $5 trillion target. But yes, later on, depending on the growth projections, we may be able to do that. So the question is, what are the impediments to the growth of the economy? This is most unlikely that we'll achieve this kind of high growth, because the pre-pandemic rate of growth had already declined for 8 quarters and reached 3.1% in the quarter just before the pandemic. So pandemic has damaged the economy quite a lot. So actually, even before the pandemic, the economy was slowing down. And during the pandemic, we had a huge impact on the unorganized non-agriculture sector. So the economy further slowed down if you look at the data. Consumer confidence is still at around 75. As this table here shows, the consumer confidence in January 2020, when that was just before the pandemic, it was 104. Now, compared to that, we are now at about 75. Capacity utilization, which data the RBI gives, which is for the organized sector, it has reached only around 74. As the data here shows, that it was very low during the pandemic, 47.3, 69.4, 60, and it's now clawing its way back. But at this low capacity utilization, we don't expect the investment rate to suddenly go up. If you remember 2012-13, which was kind of a crisis year, the investment rate in the economy had peaked at about 36%. And after that, it has come down, as Mr. Sivaraman already gave the data. It was hovering between 28 to 32%. We are still roughly around that. Now, the unorganized non-agriculture sector has been declining. That's been my estimate that at least 5% of the units have closed down, and 5% demand has shifted from the unorganized sector to the organized sector. You can look at the Hindustan Lever annual report, which tells you that the demand is shifting, and that's why the market share for Hindustan Lever has gone up. And they've themselves said that the small sector is unable to deal with the problems that they're facing, and so demand is shifting. You can also look at the pressure cooker industry, where the pressure cooker industry chairperson has said that demand is shifted from the unorganized sector to the organized sector. Now, as a result of all this shift that has taken place from the time of demonetization, then GST, and then the pandemic, inequalities have risen greatly between the organized sector and the unorganized sector, and others also. I'll quote to you a little later the data from the survey that came which is done by Price and organization that showed that the inequalities are growing, and similar estimates have come from Credit Suisse and from Oxfam. Now, when inequalities grow, what happens is that the mass demand, that does not rise. And when the mass demand does not rise, then we are dependent on investment to actually fulfill the demand issue. And because investment and savings, as Mr. Sivaraman has pointed out, has actually been quite low in India, that's unable to fulfill, and therefore there has been a shortfall of demand. And that shortfall of demand is the reason why, as I pointed out, the growth rate had been falling for 8 quarters prior to the pandemic, and then it has fallen further after that. And during the pandemic also, as you can see, the disparities have grown, and therefore demand will not be very buoyant. If the consumer sentiment is low, then consumption will not revive as much as it should revive to give a boost. When the consumption revives and the capacity utilization goes up, and capacity utilization goes up, then investment goes up, and then the growth rate goes up. So we need to look at the demand problem in the economy very clearly if we are to revive the economy and raise the rate of growth of the economy. Now, there are many impediments that are coming due to the war. The Ukraine war is heightening the already existing crisis due to the pandemic. If you notice, India's rate of inflation has been very high. The wholesale price index has been above 10% for more than 12 months now. The CPI, the consumer price index, has been growing at above 6% for the last 4-5 months. So at a high rate of inflation, the poor people get impacted, the unorganized sector gets impacted, and demand therefore further declines. Now, because of the Ukraine war, the already existing supply bottlenecks that were there because of the pandemic, those have got heightened further. If you remember, before the Ukraine war itself, commodity prices were rising, metal prices were rising, shipping and freight rates were rising because of shortage of containers. Containers got stuck at ports, so therefore you had the transport costs rising, you had fuel costs rising, you had metal prices rising. And because of the Ukraine war, these have already risen very dramatically again. You find that Russia is a big supplier of energy, and because of sanctions, those supplies could not come to Europe, could not come out from there, or came out only much less than what they used to come out, and therefore the prices of energy, Brent crude and others, coal, etc., they rose. Similarly, there are suppliers of fertilizers, so fertilizer prices have gone up. Ukraine and Russia are suppliers of food items like wheat and sunflower oil, etc. They're not able to come out, and therefore those prices have risen. So because of that, supply chains have got disrupted, and as supply chains have got disrupted, prices have risen. You've had record price increases in the US and now recently in UK. In fact, there are protests going on in the UK as well about this high rate of inflation there. India is experiencing, and globally there is a increase in prices because of the disruption in trade and also finance. Let's not forget that finance is getting highly disturbed because of the sanctions on the banks and other financial things of the Russians. And that is going to go forward and create further issues because India's trade with Russia will get disrupted, because how do we make payments? Our banks will be open to sanctions if we continue in the normal way. So there are many problems that will arise in trade and finance. So supply disruptions are taking place, leading to high inflation, and the growth is slowing down. US in the last quarter had a negative rate of growth. This quarter also, people are worried that there may be negative rate of growth, and therefore, if that happens, then we can say that the US economy has slipped into recession. It's a likelihood, but we don't know fully. But of course, there's stagflation situation because we have high inflation and very low rate of growth in large parts of the world, including in India, where our rate of growth, if you adjust for the unorganized sector, is not 8%, but close to 0%, as I'll argue a little later. Now, stagflationary situation is very difficult to deal with because the central banks, which raise interest rates, cut liquidity, that's affecting demand, and then demand gets further lowered. Then, of course, the growth rate suffers, and then that can cause a recession globally. So that's the kind of problem that we are facing. Now, growth is not measured correctly, and I'm not going to go into details of that because Mr. Sivaraman has already pointed out the various kinds of measures, problems that are there. But the biggest problem at the moment is that the unorganized sector has been declining since the time of demonetization, because demonetization affected the unorganized sector very badly. GST then again affected the unorganized sector, even though the unorganized sector is kept out of GST. Below 50 lakh turnover, you don't have GST. Up to 1.5 crore, you are in the composition scheme paying 1% tax only. But the point is the input credit, and it's the non-availability of the input credit that is creating the problem for the unorganized sector. And that's why the demand is shifting from the unorganized sector to the organized sector. So if you were to measure the unorganized sector independently, and in my recent piece in the Hindu, I have tried to give some numbers, then our rate of growth instead of being 8% would be close to 0, in which case they are already facing stagflation. Also, as I said earlier, there are rising inequalities, and the price survey data showed that the top 20% have gained incomes after 2015-16 to 2020-21, but the bottom 20% have lost 50% of the incomes. So the bottom 60% have lost incomes, the top 40% have gained, but the biggest gains are of the top 20% and the biggest losses are of the bottom 20%. So large number of people have slipped below the poverty line. Now, this is a problem, as we saw during the pandemic, that large number of people had to migrate because they don't have a living wage. So 90% of the workers said that they don't have savings even to buy 1 week of supplies. And that's why, they started starving as soon as work stopped, and they had to migrate in terrible conditions back to their villages, in the heat with children in tow and with the luggage that they had. It was a very trying time, and we understood that, how bad the living conditions for most of the people are. Also, another point that needs to be flagged at the moment is that the socio-political conditions are deteriorating in the country, and that's why high net worth individuals are leaving. In 2018, the estimate was that there are 2.5 lakh high net worth individuals in India, and that's defined as people who have $10 million plus of liquid assets which can move around. Now, there are 2.5 lakh such individuals according to that estimate. Of that, 23,000 had left by between 2014 and 2017, 5,000 left in 2018, and I'm told that 9,000 have left in the last 1 year. So in other words, the socio-political conditions, if they deteriorate, and if those people who have the assets and the savings and the investment, if they begin to leave, then the investment rate will further weaken, and that'll create further problem in terms of the growth of the economy. Now, further, the problem, as Mr. Sivaraman has already pointed out, is not employment, but is unemployment, underemployment, and disguised unemployment. That is why in agriculture, you have large number of people who have very low productivity work or zero productivity work, and that's called disguised unemployment. And then a lot of people have very few hours of work during the day, so they are underemployed. So it's not that the unemployment rate in India is very high, it's the underemployment and the disguised unemployment that are very high, and that is what needs to be looked at. And as he pointed out, the labor force participation rate, and here I'm quoting from CMIE figures, which differ from the government's figures. The CMI figures say that in 2015, the labor force participation rate was 46%. Now it's down to 42%. In between, during the pandemic, it was down to 38% or even 36%. So when labor force participation rate goes down, it means large number of workers in the working age population of 15 to 64, they're not working, in which case the rate of growth cannot rise. Second point is that our labor force participation rate is very low compared to other similar countries like China, Brazil, USA, where it is above 60%. So what it implies is that roughly 20% of our workforce, which could be working, is actually not working. And he rightly pointed out that large number of women are out of the workforce. And that's why, the problem is much more acute. There's a gender imbalance over there. So we need to create proper work for about 20 crore people if we are to be a fast-growing economy. So GDP will begin to rise if we are able to create enough work for these people. And minus the welfare measures, our problem would be much more acute. We've got free food, we've got gas, etc., which is helping the poor people. But if you subtract that, their earnings are very low. So e-Shram portal data for 27 crore people from the unorganized sector has come out, which shows that 94% of the unorganized sector workers earn less than 10,000 rupees per month. So that's the level at which we have a problem. Similarly, if we see the Delhi socioeconomic survey and we project it to the all India, then we find that 98% of Indian families spend less than 20,000 rupees per month, and 90% spend less than 10,000 rupees per month. So actually at the lower end, 90%, are people who don't have adequate purchasing power. And that's why we have a problem of growth, which is slowing down. Now to conclude, global factors are not in government's control, the pandemic, the Ukraine war, but internal factors are clearly in the government's control, and the government needs to act on them very quickly so as to boost growth in the economy. Otherwise the growth is slowing down. Government needs to therefore change the policy paradigm from supply side policies to demand side policies. So we need to boost demand with employment generation, both in urban and rural areas. So schemes need to be created so as to boost demand. And this is where I've been arguing that rather than go for big projects like the freight corridor and the massive highway program, where people work with big bulldozers and big machines, so very little direct employment is generated over there. We need small projects in rural areas and urban areas, which will generate a lot more employment. We need to boost the micro sector. Micro sector consists of 6 crore units, small and medium are 6 lakh units, and the large are 6,000 units. So there's a factor of 100 between the large and the small and medium, and another factor of 100 to micro. And micro sector employs 97.5% of the MSME employment. And it's the micro sector and the small sector that has been in trouble, and that's why the employment generation has gone down. So micro sector needs to be helped separately from the small and medium. We need to raise direct taxes and cut indirect taxes to take care of inflation. So we need to consider wealth tax, gift tax, and estate duty. GST, which has been creating a problem for the unorganized sector, should be made a last point tax. And as Mr. Sivaraman said, I don't want to go into that. We need to develop technology rapidly so as to be able to face global competition. If you remember, from RCEP, we withdrew at the last minute because we could not face the competition of China. And what Mr. Sivaraman very correctly pointed out, we have to worry about the environment because that will damage our GDP growth, and it will also create new viruses. The new viruses that are coming, and the SARS-CoV virus was the 7th new virus in the last 22 years. So every 2 to 3 years, new viruses are coming because animals are coming close to the human beings. And therefore, we need to worry about the development paradigm in which the environment is getting damaged very badly. Technology is creating problems for employment. Technology is creating problems globally. So the government needs to look at these issues also. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you, Professor, for a wonderful exposition. Now, for the industry view, I invite Mr. Kumar.
I'm quite upset with the MMA group captain. You get one of the top administrators, and then you get one of the most eminent economists, and then you get me in as the third speaker. How fair is this? So, ladies and gentlemen, please be kind and show me some intelligence. Fortunately, I am not an economist. I do not have a background in socio-political economics. Therefore, but I do have some experience in business and training. I'm going to take a view in a very micro sense. I do not have anything to share about when and how we will reach $5 trillion as GDP. I'll go with the layman's assumption and perspective that at some stage we will. If it's not 27, it's going to be 28 or whatever. But the question that I really want to put in front of you is what kind of a $5 trillion economy do we want to have? You can theoretically have a $5 trillion economy, which is dominated by 2 Saudi Aramcos and 4 Apples and 3 Googles. I mean, end of story. Which means you will have a continued, lack of equity. You will have rich getting richer and poor getting poorer, which is something that Dr. Arun Kumar pointed out. Or you would like to have an economy where large parts of the population feel that they are succeeding along with the country succeeding in its economic terms. And that's really what I want to dwell on for today. And while what I'm going to say may sound a little simplistic, but I want to propose to you that one of the most important things that the government has to do, and we as a country have to do, is really start thinking about what kind of the mid segment of the economy do we want to have. As Dr. Arun Kumar pointed out, they are hurting. They have been beaten really badly in the last couple of years. Not that they used to be flourishing enormously in the past, but they used to keep doing reasonably okay. They used to put food on the table, etc. But in the last couple of years, they have been beaten really badly. One way of looking at it is say that, look, we are in a bad place. The second way of looking at it is we have reached such a poor place, anything is way up. And is this an opportunity for us to really rethink the mid segment of the economy or the MSMEs of the economy and actually make them leapfrog into a future where they are able to create wealth and equity when we are a $5 trillion economy and eventually a $10 trillion economy and things like that. So to sort of support some of what I have said just now, I want to share a couple of data points and then we'll take it from there. I have a couple of broad suggestions and I'll stop there at the end of 12 minutes and then maybe we can have a conversation after that. The immediate past chief economic advisor, Mr. Subramaniam, I've heard him refer to this data piece. He said in the 5th year, an American company which employs 100 people, this is research. So in the 40th year of its existence, employs about 800 people, which means it has multiplied the employment 8 times. And in a 40-year period, you would assume technology grows quite substantially up, and therefore the productivity per employee or productivity per dollar invested in the business has gone up not 8 times, but maybe multiples of 8 times. If you make that comparison with an Indian company, let's say in the 5th year, an Indian company has 100 employees, what is the number of people that Indian company would have at the end of the 40th year? Do you want to take a guess? Wild one? It is 140 employees. an Indian company grows 1.4 times in 8 years, as opposed to 8 times in the case of an American company. Today, we talk about this as dwarfism. We have a problem of entities not growing to the size that they ought to grow to be competitive and meaningful in the marketplace. Does that mean our entrepreneurs are less clever or they are less aspirational as compared to the Americans? No. I think our entrepreneurs are as good, or in most cases, much better than what you will find anywhere else in the world. And I would argue, and probably it's a simplistic argument, that we do not give them an ecosystem in which they grow and flourish and reach a point where they are able to behave like, for example, an American entity at the end of the 40 years. Let's keep this data point, for the moment. I'll come back to this. I said, for us to be an equitable, economy, we have to have not just 4 or 5 companies creating all the wealth, but it has to be widespread across, which means MSMEs have to grow. And Dr. Arun Kumar did speak about this and so on. But the question that is often asked is there headroom for MSMEs to grow? We already speak about how MSMEs contribute to 40% of our exports, and we talk about how much of employment load they take on themselves. Therefore, is there a headroom for them to grow? To answer that question, I did make some comparisons with countries that we like to compare and so on. Mr. Sathiya did not want to talk about China, but I'll make one reference to China. We picked up 3 countries, the US, China, and Germany. I picked up US because all of us aspire to be like the US economy, perfect capitalist economy, and so on at some stage. China, because this is a favorite comparison. We always want to compare ourselves with China. And Germany, because the German economy is characterized by the success of the middle segment of the economy. They call it Mittelstand or something like that. So I said, let's look at where they stand vis-a-vis our MSME sector. Our MSME sector ballpark accounts for something like 30% of the GDP. And if you take China, it turns out that they account for almost double of the GDP, almost 55, 56, 60%. Obviously, this data is probably a year something old, so it might have changed a little bit, but directionally it gives you a sense. In the US, it's, I think, 40, 42, 43% of GDP. And in the case of Germany, it's about 48% or so. Therefore, while in the last couple of years they have been beaten down, there is an argument to be made that they can potentially play a much larger role in our economy and occupy a much larger share of the GDP going forward, assuming we did a few things right. The second comparison we did was to look at the number of firms. Forget about the US and Germany, these are smaller countries, but China has half the number of entities as MSMEs as India does. What does this tell us? It tells us that India has a number of dwarfs, so to speak, that have spawned all over the place, which probably, I'm probably being unkind here, do not have the ability to compete effectively in the marketplace, and therefore they get hit much before anybody else gets hit when there is an economic downturn. And if you look at the exports, the Indian MSMEs account for something like 40% of the exports. China MSMEs account for less than 10%. This came as a surprise to me, but that's what the data says. And in the case of the US, it's about 30%, and the case of Germany, it's about 16%. In fact, what we are doing is making the MSMEs take a disproportionately large load of exports with the limited size that they have and the limited means that they have as compared to the larger corporations, or vice versa. The larger corporations are actually not taking the amount of load they ought to be taking to be in the export markets. What does this tell us? It tells us, one, there is a problem of dwarfism and there is a problem of lack of competitiveness with that middle segment of the economy. But there is enormous headroom for them to grow and occupy a very important position in the GDP. Does it happen in 2 years, 3 years? It's unlikely, but eventually, if we did a lot of things right, they can actually become a substantial part of the GDP. But as they grow, they are not going to grow on the back of exporting to other countries. If the benchmarks with some of the comparisons that I made were to be true, they have to find markets in India. And therefore, we have to have a way by which they will grow. They will occupy a much larger space, but they will increasingly serve customers inside the country, as opposed to, while the export numbers may grow, the percentage of exports may not be as much as 40% as it is today. Therefore, there is something for the government and policymakers to think about, that if we did not pay enough attention to it, we will have growth. I mean, all parameters of the economy are favorable for us to achieve 5, 6, 7, $10 trillion over a period of time, but it will possibly end up being unjust, inequitable sort of a growth. And I would argue this is really where we have to pay a lot of attention. And to that extent, 5 trillion per se is not the question. What is the quality of 5 trillion is the question that we have to answer for ourselves. To some extent, if you look back in time and ask the question, why did MSMEs are in the place where they are? I would probably make a reference to a couple of points, fairly general, but happy to answer questions later on. To begin with, we as a country have treated MSMEs as those entities which will start as MSMEs and end as MSMEs. If you look at all of our MSME policies, they are largely around providing some sort of infrastructure support, some sort of skill training, some sort of seed capital, etc. Compare this with what the METI of Japan did. They said, I'm going to take the small company out of Japan and I'm going to make that brand globally popular. That's what they did with Citizen. That's what they did with Sony. This is what Korea also did. They took the small companies, which are now chaebols, from wherever they were as small entities to where they are now. And Robert Bosch, the company that we all know of and we have their components in our cars, is still called a Mittelstand. That's where they started. And therefore, we have done a lot of disservice to our MSMEs by thinking about MSME strategy as for someone who will refuse to grow. We have created some set of policies where they are treated as small players forever. The second thing that has not happened very well is we have treated MSMEs of all sizes, shapes, colors as one block called MSMEs. By definition, they come from different industries. You have someone who's weaving a sari in Kanchipuram to someone who's doing ancillary turning and gear cutting work for a large company in Tuvakudi in Trichy, or someone who's running a small spa or Ayurvedic thing in Chennai. But we have somehow clubbed all of this together and said, let's create industrial estates, let's create sheds, let's give them seed capital, let's give them some skill training. How does it become relevant for a Kanchipuram weaver to be given skill training? He's probably the best in the world. What he is looking for is market access and market expansion. Right now, he is serving ladies in India, the ladies in the Indian diaspora around the world. But why are we not helping him in taking that silk, woven silk, to being a wall covering of the best hotel in New York, or the best or the richest man's house in the Bay Area? So, as similarly, if you're talking about someone like a Ayurvedic spa, he doesn't want any of these things. He wants an internationally recognizable accreditation, which will bring him dollar-paying customers from outside. Whereas I think we have sort of oversimplified this. I'm saying this as a layman from outside of the government decision-making structure, but this is what occurs to me, that we have somehow done this. And by the way, we have some good examples that we can follow. For example, in the US, their MSME strategy has sector-specific activities that they have thought about. We can learn something from there. China has this one village, one product, one industry. They help small companies come together, bulk up, and be competitive and take on the world. So some of these ideas can actually be taken up and put into motion within the country. I would ideally like to see the MSMEs that we have today, not as companies that are under stress, but as world beaters that can actually create wealth for a large number of people who feel that they are succeeding when the country is growing to a much larger size. Thank you for your patience, and I'll take questions later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar. Thank you, my panelists. Though I have my own questions, I'm not going to flag them now because I know the audience have their own questions, and there are also people who will be watching on the online, and they may have also sent questions. Mr. Sripati, would you like to say? Okay. Okay, no.
Yeah, go ahead.
Subramanian.
Oh, yeah, it's okay. Working.
Hello. Yeah. Good evening, sir. Thank you for the insightful. Yeah. My question is to Shri Ammar. My question is to Shri Ammar Sivaraman, sir. As he rightly mentioned about population and lagging economic growth, you have taken the case of Bihar, sir. So do you think we are addressing the symptom instead of the root causes, speaking in terms of population policy? Because you cannot procreate at the rate of 1 Australia every year and expect the economy to do wonders. Your comments on this, please, sir.
Sir, I don't think I mentioned anything about population policy as such. I only said Bihar with a population around 10 crores, if it does not grow properly, it is going to drag the entire country down. That's what I said. I didn't mention anything about population policy. Actually, the population is stabilizing very fast, much faster than many of the population experts said that. We are already reached the net reproductive rate, and many states are far below the net reproductive. So therefore, population is not going to pose any major problem to us. It is the quality of the population which may pose a problem.
Anybody?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. I'm Sathiya. Yes, I want to ask some question.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Actually, now I am thinking a lot of work is going, fashion work is going on. Only we're concentrating where our country is more population. They're not long-time work, not doing anything. Agriculture or any MSMEs, they're really not concentrating. And practical is very difficult. Fashion work means IT and software only concentrating. They only develop. Other things are not developed. It's a very long trend. One kind of people only getting income. Even they don't have sufficient knowledge. The other things they are not. They're looking only systems. They get difficult. So one time I visited one, I'm doing bank work. I given one proposal. They're telling what the system is telling. Why you are talking system? You don't have practical knowledge. You are getting salary, too much salary, too much facilities. You can't practical knowledge. I tell that.
Sir, go ahead with your question, sir. Your observation is well heard. Any
I
questions?
don't know, but Delhi bus.
Yeah, please tell your question, sir, please. Because you already overshot the time.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Yeah, give the mic to.
Okay.
Yes.
Hello, this is addressed to Mr. Sivaraman. You mentioned the fact that different states have different per capita income. Is it because of central government policies that there is such disparity in the per capita income of the different states?
Certainly not. Because the states are most of the development projects are executed by the state. Central government does not execute any project, excepting central government's own industries like defense industries, etc. It is the state's own policies which develop a state or not develop a state. For example, Tamil Nadu is hell-bent for leather in promoting MSMEs. They are doing a lot of good work in MSMEs and attracting foreign investment, etc. Take, for example, UP, laying down of infrastructure, constructing major international airports, wooing industries, making one industry, one district. All these efforts are being taken by many states in this country, attracting industries by giving them concessions, etc., making easily accessible all the permits, etc., to be given. There may be 30, 40 permits to be taken, which is not very new because other states, other countries also have got these permits, but they get it very quickly. Now with the new act which is coming into it, the DESH Act, as they call it, which is a replacement of the SEZ Act, they want the SEZ hub itself to give all this permission without any access to the state government within the entire structure in the hub. The hub director or whoever is the authority in charge, he will give the permit for water, he will give the permit for everything because it will be a one supply to this. So that's a new act which is coming. So it is the state government's own responsibility. Now, as I see, I studied Bihar, and in the case of Bihar, there has been no focus on anything. Are they focusing on industry? Are they focusing on social justice? Tamil Nadu focused on social justice for a very long time, and they achieved a very good amount of social justice. Uttar Pradesh, for example, is now hell-bent for industrializing it. Madhya Pradesh, for example, focused on agricultural production. Now it has become a granary of India. It produces more wheat than Punjab, produces more rice than Punjab. So it is now diverting its attention for industrialization. That was one of the Bihar states. Rajasthan is again trying to industrialize itself. So Bihar, unfortunately, you don't see any such major effort. At least one doesn't hear about it. In Orissa, a lot of efforts are going on in this direction. Also, Orissa has got a serious problem because 20% of its population is Adivasi population, and most of the resources are located in Adivasi areas, and they don't permit any extraction to it. So every state government has got its own policies for development. So it is the state government which has to do it. Bihar has got the entire Indo-Gangetic plain. Bihar has got the entire Ganges running through it. So whether it is exploiting its resources or not, it is for the state government.
May I add something? Can I add something?
Run out of time. Sripati, then I got a couple of questions online, sir. I'll go to online questions. Now it's the last question from audience in there.
If you want me to ask a question, can I make observations? Just a couple of them, not questions. See, according to my own view, take for example Moradabad and let us say Kumbakonam. These two places, two different. Now Kumbakonam known for bronzeware, Moradabad known for the carpentry weaving, this and that, and then exceedingly fine quality. Now, courtesy, our following or aping the West, child labor, this, that, everything, what we have killed both of them. The economy there is just down. No, this is one major impact which we have. I've only taken two extreme examples. Now, today there is nobody available to do the Sudai Valley, the sculpture, this and that. That is also part of economy. Now, how does the economy grow with all these things? Now, Mr. Kumar was mentioning about MSME. That is the thing which we have not been able to tap at all for various reasons. The reasons are very well known. One, this getting money. If some hit is there, MSME collapses and economy collapses. That is precisely the problem as far as India is concerned. You mentioned about the women. This is also one sentence. The women folk in India work much harder than anywhere else in the world. Have we evaluated their or have we monetized their work? We have not. Then if that is done, our economy will be in a totally different place. This is all the observation. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is absolutely right. The evaluation of work done by women is one of the reasons which has not been done, is one of the reasons why women's labor participation is low. A study has been done. A lot of farm work is done by women. That is not added to the GDP. Lot of other work is done by women in the industries which are run by family-run industries. That is not taken into the GDP. That's why I said GDP measure is extremely difficult. And unless, see in India, the statistics which is coming from all this organized sector is anybody's guess. There is no system of gathering statistics from 63 million MSMEs in a formal way. Whereas in the case of organized industry, they have to submit forms regarding production, return, etc. to the company of a department or company. And there is an Indian Statistics Act which compels people to, but it's not being properly implemented. So that is why I said, Mr. Arun Kumar, Professor Arun Kumar did not answer my question. I would request him to answer now. his statement of 144 lakh crores being the black economy, does he say that it is the black wealth, or does he say it is income? Because they are different. Income is flow and wealth is stock. So in his statement to the DNA paper, he said his estimate was 144 lakh crores. How much of it is accounted for in GDP? How much of it is not? There lies the crux of the whole issue.
Dr. Arun Kumar would like to respond, sir. We also got a couple of other questions online.
So very quickly, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead, sir.
So very quickly, actually, it's an estimate of the black income generated, not the black wealth. As you know, black wealth is the accumulation of the black savings over a period of time. So black savings or black wealth would be about 4 times the black income generated currently. And this estimate I had given when the GDP estimate was about 200 lakh crores. And my estimate in my EPW paper in 2016, November, was that the black income generation is 62% of the GDP. Now, at that time, Ratin Ray from NIPFP told me that their estimate was 72%, so it was even higher than what my estimate was. But my estimate is that this 62% of GDP at that time was 144 lakh crore, and that is not accounted for in the economy. So this is what is not accounted for. So actually, the GDP is larger than what the estimated 200 lakh crore is. But the problem that I have been pointing out is that because of the black economy acting like digging holes and filling holes, lowers the investment productivity. So the investment, if the economy goes down as a result of black income generation because of leakages from the internal economy, and that's why the incremental capital output ratio is higher than what is officially given. So the savings rate is higher, but the investment rate is lower. But the incremental capital output ratio is higher. So the formula that Mr. Sivaraman was giving, or the savings rate divided by the incremental capital output ratio, that lowers the rate of growth of the economy from the potential. So I've been arguing that the Indian economy has been losing 5% rate of growth since the time of the 1980s, when the black economy became more than 10%. So if you add 5% every year, today the Indian economy would be 8 times larger than what it is. So therefore, it would be larger than the US economy also. So that's a missed development because of the black income generation.
Thank you, sir. We have got over 700 viewers watching online. We've got a number of questions. I will pick up 3 questions each to each of the panelists. First question to Dr. Arun Kumar, sir. So here's a question from Mr. Raman from Coimbatore. He says, sir, do you agree with the perception in PSU privatization? Since the early days of economic reforms, we are actually selling the family silver to pay for the bills. Where are we heading in the face of the existing factors and figures? Your views, sir.
Okay, so what we have done is we have very mechanically looked at the public sector, the issues. Public sector has made a lot of losses, but the questions as to why they made losses, and public sector is much bigger than just the public sector units. We have public sector in education, health, and various other areas as well. So the question is, what is the role that the public sector needs to play in an economy? And especially during the pandemic, it has been realized that when there's a crisis, the markets begin to fail. And when markets begin to fail, then public sector has an important role to play. So we have to analyze why the public sector in India performed poorly before 1990 and why it made losses, and then rectify those. So rather than throw the baby out with the bathwater, we needed to rectify. There are some areas where public sector may not be needed. We need to get out of those areas. But there are many areas where public sector has an important role to play, especially given the poverty levels that we have in India. So whether it be in education, whether it be in health, whether it be in other what are called merit wants, those areas, it's very important. Then in a lot of areas of infrastructure, etc., especially for the poor people, public sector has an important role to play. So therefore, we need to have a graded policy towards the public sector. This is not what we've had. We've either gone this way or that way completely. We've either said that we need a big public sector, or we say that we don't need a public sector, and therefore we need to disinvest. So we need to have a graded policy in which we decide on the basis of our needs. Our country is not like the advanced countries where the number of people who are below the poverty line is very small. As the data shows, recently the e-Shram portal 94% said that they're earning less than 10,000 rupees per month. Now, those are the people who need support, and that's where the public sector becomes important.
Thank you, sir. Now we have a question from Mr. Ravi from Chennai. This is a question addressed to Mr. Sivaraman. What he wants to know is the successive governments at the center have first criticized the social welfare schemes of state governments, but have no hesitation adapting many of them at the national level. Even now, what is otherwise ridiculed as a freebies account for a substantial portion of the union budget. So your views and comments on this.
My comments are very clear. I'm not saying freebies are per se bad. I'm only saying freebies should be given to the people who really require it. It should not be given to the people who do not require it. Because there are a lot of people who are indigent, who are not being cared for, orphans are there, widows are there. These are the people who get freebies, not the youth who are wandering in the street. They should be given motorbikes or cycles or this and that. Freebies are being given by the government of India also, like urban housing schemes of Modi, or the rural housing schemes where houses are being constructed. And these are also being given to the poor people only. Freebies should not be generalized. Freebies should be given to the people who really deserve it. Otherwise, it becomes a political phenomenon. This is what has been addressed to by the cabinet secretary to all the chief secretaries recently, very indirectly. That is, some of the states are going to reach a collapsing stage on account of the very heavy debt burden they have which they have taken into account. So some of them are saying, the cabinet secretary has written letter, please watch out. You look at your debt burden. If the debt burden increases, what happens? Professor Arun Kumar will explain very clearly that our revenue resources, 30% of government of India's revenue resources go for the payment of interest. So where does the interest go? Interest go to the people who are holding government securities. Who hold the government securities? I don't have to say who hold the government securities, not Vijay Kumar, not Sivaraman. It is held by people, rich houses which are being held. So what is happening? Government is collecting taxes, 30% is being paid by interest, it is getting distributed to the richer people. Is this social security? So this is not social security. And this is what is happening in many state governments. They borrow, they seem to be giving money to the poor people, but bulk of it is borrowed. So they pay interest, that money goes back to the rich. So you have to limit the freebies only to those people who really deserve it. Then there is social justice.
Thank you, sir. One last question for the evening addressed to Mr. Kumar is come from Mr. Saxena from Nagpur. So he wants to know, name one priority area each for short term, medium term, and long term. You also want to know what's your take on unending MNC's demand for ease of doing business?
Sorry, say that again.
Unending demands of MNCs for ease of doing business in India. Where do we stand on this?
Look, I mean, it is a fact that the cost of doing business in India is relatively high compared to most of the countries. While we have improved our standing in ease of doing business, in reality, it's probably not the case. Therefore, I don't want to get into which country is better or worse, but clearly there is a case to be made for example, the cost of compliance that can come down. Not just the regulation, but look at the quality of our supply chain. Our cost of logistics is 12, 13, 14% of the GDP, whereas in China, it's probably 10%, and some of the 8% or some of the Western countries is lower. So even assuming regulations are good, I incur a cost of additional, let's say 4% of my P&L just to run the business in India as compared to what I would incur elsewhere. That is a penalty we pay. Therefore, if there is a domestic market to be served, every manufacturer incurs that penalty, and therefore it's easy for a company to do that. But if you have to base your production here and sell substantially to an overseas market, there you get hit. 4% is the amount of PAT many companies would make. I mean, you just have to forgo that. And therefore, I completely agree that things can be better. Have they improved? Most certainly, but clearly there is a long way to go.
Thank you, sir. He's also asked one priority area. Maybe you can indicate only for a long-term priority area for achieving our dreams.
From an industry standpoint, we are, particularly with reference to manufacturing, we are in the danger of becoming converters. If you look at the P&L accounts of most manufacturing companies, the cost of material is a huge component. I think we need to go away from that into far greater value addition. And therefore, if you were to look at one big priority area for the long term, we have to get far more number of fine academic institutions, which are today teaching shops. They have to be investing in academic research. And there has to be far greater integration between teaching institutions and particularly MSME for applied research. Today, MSMEs are complete converters. They do not have know-how. Whereas if you look at MSMEs in Germany, Europe, they work on the basis of know-how and not conversion cost. I think over the next 20 years, if we do not find ways to create technology locally, particularly in manufacturing, forget about the software and things like that, we will progressively get somewhat marginalized in the world.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. We come to the end of the session today. Maybe one final word from Sathiya, would you like to say something? Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. I think it's a fascinating evening. This subject we can keep discussing. There's so many issues are there, but I don't think in 1.5 hours you could do. But big round of applause to our distinguished panelists who brought great insights on the topic, and I'm quite sure we are all going out with more wisdom and learn more things. Now I request Stephen, you also join us, sir. We present a memento to the distinguished panelists. Would you like to join on stage, sir?
Thank you very much.
Mr. Arun Kumar, you are not here with us. When you come, we got a lovely book.
Sure.
Which will give you. On behalf of you, we are. This is what we do when we are not able to reach you physically. On behalf of you, we'll be giving the mask to the people because that is the need of the hour.
Thank you.
Achieve, I think, what is our aim. Thank you for joining us from
Thank you
Delhi,
very
sir. Sparing your valuable time.
Thank you, my panelists. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Yeah.
Good night.
Thank you, sir. Bye bye. Till we
Thank
meet
you.
again.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you for organizing. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.